Next tonight, we have a conversation with self-described radical journalist and scholar I.F. Stone. For more than 60 years, Stone has been practicing his own distinctive brand of journalism, a unique combination of muckraking and scholarship. As editor of his own weekly political newsletter from the 1950s to the 1970s, he attacked McCarthyism, the war in Vietnam, racism, and hypocrisy wherever he found it, very often by simply poring over pages and pages of documents and records, looking for facts or inconsistencies that others missed. Since then, Stone has turned his attentions to a lifelong fascination, the study of the classics. And in his new book, he has focused on one of the most famous historical events of ancient Greece, the trial in 399 BC of the philosopher Socrates. Accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and not believing in the Greek gods, Socrates was condemned and forced to drink the poison hemlock. Today, we know of Socrates and his trial mostly through the writings of Plato, his famous student. But the investigative reporter in I.F. Stone wanted to find out more. I talked to him recently in New York. Mr. Stone, I am very grateful to you because looking at ancient Athens through your eyes as a political journalist and a civil libertarian, you've certainly made it come alive in a very different way for me than anything I've learned in college. I wonder what you think you brought to it as a political journalist that centuries of scholarship did not. What quality of mind do you think?
Marx once said in the 18th Brumaire that history was a form of politics, and he didn't mean the distortion of history, Stalinist style. He meant that one's political spectacles determined how one saw things. I mean, if you read the Puritan Revolution through the eyes of a Whig like Macaulay, it's one thing. Look at it through a radical Tory's eyes like Hume's, it's another. Not a matter of who's right or wrong, but you see different things. I brought to it a passionate pro-democratic bias, whereas classical scholarship through the ages, generally, though with many honorable exceptions, has been very anti-democratic. It was Cicero and Plutarch who were the great transmitters to the West of classical antiquity, and both of them were very contemptuous of the mob.
You call Socrates, the subject of your book, you call him the secular saint of our civilization. But you, as a Democrat, have some doubts about his qualifications for sainthood.
Well, yes. I feel his condemnation was wrong, and I have no defense of it. But it gave a black eye to democracy throughout the ages. The picture he got was an ignorant, bigoted mob sentencing to death a wonderful old philosopher. But the truth is that if the Athenians had been a bigoted, ignorant mob, they would have tried Socrates 25 years earlier. At least three comic writers, when he was 45, made fun of his eccentric political and religious views. He would never have lived to 70 if it had been a bigoted society. And I must notice that an eccentric and maverick philosopher like Socrates would never survive to 70 in any one of the four Platonic utopias.
Why is the Socrates story important and instructive for us today?
Well, I think of it from several points of view. Number one, I set out in anguish to try to understand how it could have happened, to tell the prosecution story and then knock it down. I don't think it was adequate. And I had such a joyful time exploring classical antiquity, and I hoped that I could transmit some of that joy to the readers and reawaken interest in young people in restudying the classics, because Athens is our yesterday. Now, when I was a boy in a country high school, headed for college, you had to have 4 years of Latin. I didn't get any Greek. I had one semester of Greek at college. But with the erosion of fundamental education, the teaching and the study of the classics has become, in too many cases, has shrunk to coteries, obsessed with minute and myopic details, only understandable by very few people. It has become a kind of collective soliloquy in lonely ivory towers. And yet the Greek experience is very vibrant, very wonderful, and very relevant to modern democracy.
Let me put one of your sentences to you concerning its apropos of its relevance. You say, Athens was free of the paranoia that has begun to affect our own society in the era of the national security state. Elaborate on that a little bit. Why begun to affect? When some people would say that the McCarthy era, which preoccupied you so much in the earlier days of your journalism, is long past, that if that was a time of paranoia, things are very different now. Why begun to affect?
Well, because I don't think I think the paranoia receded, and it's not a new factor in American history. In the wake of the French Revolution, as you know, under John Adams, at the end of the 18th century, we had the alien and sedition laws and fear of dangerous ideas coming in from France, and then we had a good deal of hysteria about the abolitionists before the Civil War, and a good deal of hysteria in the latter part of the 19th century about the anarchists, especially when several presidents were assassinated. And then right after the First World War, there was a lot of excitement about the Russian Revolution. So there have been these paranoid periods, whereas in Athens, the Franklin D. Roosevelt of Athens, Solon, about 2 centuries before Socrates, in establishing the democracy, by which I mean by opening the right to vote to the poor as well as the well-to-do and the middle class, provided not only freedom of speech and assembly, but also the right of association, so that the aristocratic opposition, some of it oligarchic and loyal, but some of it very disloyal, very small fringe, pro-Spartan, organized these clubs and secret conspiracies that Socrates refers to. These were never prosecuted because there was a right of association, and their views are regarded as very good jokes. You know, some years before the first dictatorship, that of the 400. Aristophanes wrote a play called The Birds, and he invented a word for this disloyal youth. He called them Socratified. That's a good English translation, perfect translation of the Greek word esokratoon. It means exactly that, Socratified. And pictured them as long-haired, dirty, unwashed. The Athenians were very fastidious.
Sort of things people were saying about, the establishment was saying about kids in the 60s in this country.
Yeah.
Is this a paranoid society now, do you think, this American society?
No, I don't think it's a paranoid society. I think it's very impressive how we got rid of McCarthyism. We got rid of McCarthyism in a fascinating way. First of all, the leadership was taken by conservatives, and in fact a couple of reactionaries. He was a crypto-fascist, really. It was done by the Senate, and the Senate is a club, in a good sense. People's word is a matter of honor. A lot of the work is done in the cloakroom. And McCarthy had begun to play the same dirty tricks on fellow members of the Senate that he did on members of the bureaucracy, collecting political scandal and sexual scandal about homosexuals. So they censured him. They marked him as a bounder, as the English would say, and it broke his heart. He wasn't sent to jail. He wasn't deprived of his seat. They just marked him down as a no-good SOB, and that was it. And it was beautiful. It was not brutal. It was not dictatorial. They just decided he was no good.
What do you think about the tolerance? I mean, you've been writing about 2,400 years ago, and the issue was freedom of speech, free speech. What do you think about the tolerance for free speech in America today?
Well, free speech has always had to battle in every society and every age, and in fact in every group. even little coteries of radicals have their party line, and if you go against it, well, you find your freedom of speech looked at askance. But if you look at it objectively, in large terms, we have a tradition that is more powerful than that of any other Western society when it comes to freedom of speech. Our Whigs were, unlike the British Whigs of the 17th century, were the children of the French Enlightenment, and not afraid to utter large and potentially explosive generalities about the equality of man, about freedom. So the Constitution itself and the Bill of Rights embody the Enlightenment and the best fruits of the English, American, and French Revolution. Whereas in Europe generally, constitutions are full of ifs and buts. The Weimar Constitution had emergency clauses that did no good against Hitler. The Austrian Constitution has a multitude of ifs and buts. The French, after affirming freedom of speech and press and assembly in the French Revolution, then backed away a bit, and it's not quite as sacred. So I consider ancient Athens, 200 years of freedom, one of the bright spots of human history, and I think the 200 years of the American Republic is comparable as one of the bright spots. In between, there's such a wilderness of bigotry, persecution, murder, and talk about the follies of the common man. Look at the follies of the uncommon man. How many stupid and silly ideas people were burned at the stake for advancing. So it's precarious. It's always precarious. It's always going to have to be fought for. It's the sacred American ideology, so that those of us who are dissenters and mavericks can feel part of the American tradition. This is the Jeffersonian. We're the representatives of the Jeffersonian idea, and the other side's a little bit ashamed of it, and a little bit on the defensive.
Well, Izzy Stone, thank you very much for joining us this evening.